sinners, and saints. Dust off those horns and halos. It's time for Alan After Dark.
On January 3rd, 2018, Blaze Bernstein's family realized that he was not in his room. They tried calling him on his phone, and he didn't answer. His father called Blaze's sister and asked had she heard from him, and she hadn't. His wallet was still in his room, his clothes, his luggage, his keys. Everything seemed to be still there. The only thing missing was Blaze. Authorities conducted a massive search for him, but turned up nothing. A week later, Blaze's body is found in a park where he had been brutally stabbed at least 28 times. The reason I'm bringing up Blaze's story is not only because it's important to talk about, but I want to talk about the approach the lawyer for his killer took in court. During the investigation, authorities discovered that Blaze had connected with a young man on Tinder by the name of Samuel Woodward. Samuel and Blaze had gone to high school together for just a brief period of time. Blaze was openly gay, and his family is Jewish. He was an Ivy League student who was home for winter break, and apparently he and Samuel Woodward began chatting on Tinder. On the night of January 2nd, they met at a nearby park where Woodward stabbed him to death. When the trial began almost 6 years later, Samuel Woodward looked very different from what he did when he was arrested in 2018. In fact, many people commented that he looked like Charles Manson, which, if you look up pictures of him, I think you would agree. Samuel Woodward took the stand in his own defense, and in his testimony, he claimed that he was high on weed and that he kind of zoned out. And when he came to, he said that his pants were undone, basically saying that his penis was out and that Blaze was taking pictures or threatening to take pictures and was going to out him as gay. That was his defense. During the investigation, however, authorities found lots of online posts from Samuel Woodward that supported the fact that he was a neo-Nazi. He hated Jews, he hated gay people, and totally embraced Nazism in full. He lured Blaze to that park by hinting at a possible romantic connection, a sexual connection, but his real intention was to kill a gay man. When he was caught, he tried to use the gay panic defense, even though the DA was able to totally bring him down in flames in the cross-examination. On November 15th, 2024, Samuel Woodward was sentenced to life without parole. He is, however, appealing the case, claiming that the jury did not get to hear certain evidence that would exonerate him. I do believe his appeals will fail and he will end up spending the rest of his life in prison. But I just can't get over the fact that in the year 2024, there are people that still think that they can use a gay panic defense to justify brutally murdering somebody. It just seemed just not only shocking, but just horrific listening to him on that stand, basically claiming that Blaze allegedly had unzipped his pants and took out his penis and was taking pictures of it and threatening to out him, that he would suddenly panic and whip out a knife and start stabbing him in the neck. Which, by the way, none of that was true. Blaze did not unzip his pants, put his hands on his crotch, take pictures. All of that was an absolute lie. In fact, when authorities recovered Blaze's phone, forensics were able to recover the information that was on it, despite the damage that was done from rain and being buried in the mud. And there were no pictures of Samuel Woodward in any way, shape, or form. Unfortunately, this gay panic defense that Samuel Woodward's attorney attempted to use, it probably would still work in many courtrooms here in the Bible Belt. It worked when my friend Joe was murdered. Why wouldn't it work now? Obviously, Woodward's lawyer thought it would work. Otherwise, you wouldn't try that type of defense, right? It just becomes so exasperating to hear the same old tired arguments to try to justify murdering a gay man. It really does reflect the United States now, doesn't it? It really does reflect how a certain large portion of the population still can't let go of their bigotry and their hate. They've chosen to be bigots. They've chosen to hate people based on language, literature that they've been fed from people who don't have a clue as to what a gay person goes through, how a gay person lives their life. I'm just really sick of all the bullshit. I don't give a rat's ass if you want to hate gay people. Knock your fucking self out hating us. But just leave us alone. I just don't understand how people can't leave other people alone. You know, when you go to pride events and you see the protesters, they're just there to try to make us miserable. They live for making others miserable. I would want to spend the brief time that we have on this earth making myself happy, not trying to make others miserable. It's just a constant battle that I see no end to. And we have to keep it up. We have to keep fighting. But you would think after all these years, after the murder of Matthew Shepard, that we would have progressed somewhat as a people. But the more you think we're progressing, the more we're going backwards. I'm sorry, Matthew Shepard was this sweet young gay man who was brutally beaten, stripped down to his underwear, and tied to a fence in freezing cold weather, where he was left to die. That happened about 30 years ago. Sometimes life is just shitty, isn't it? Samuel Woodward's defense attorney tried to imply that he was struggling with his own sexual identity, but on the stand, he said that he wasn't gay, wasn't struggling with it, and that kind of shot down his defense. What cracks me up is that he thinks when he's in prison, he will hook up with other neo-Nazis. But I got news for you, Samuel Woodward. You're going to be somebody's bitch in there. They're going to turn your ass inside out, and you're going to be the queer that you claim to hate. And there is some poetic justice in that notion, isn't there? You know, I think it should be mandatory to watch that show Oz. That was sort of like a soap opera behind bars in prison. Yeah, I know, all the naked men and the sex scenes and such, but goddamn, there was some fucked up shit on there. I think that if you saw that show, it would really make you reconsider choosing a life of crime. Holy shit, there was some fucked up shit on there. Holy God. Remember Tobias grew his fingernails out to gouge the eyes out of that anti-Semitic guard and then stab him in the throat and kill him? That's some fucked up shit. I mean, with his fucking fingernails. And then he goes back to his cell and just clips off the nails and flushes them. Bam, just like that. And you're like, holy fuck, that shit really does happen in prison, doesn't it? Oh, Jesus. But before we move on, I just want to say one thing sincerely from the bottom of my heart. To all the haters out there, go fuck yourself. This week, I was talking to one of my besties, and the subject came up. Well, he brought up the subject of this trend that seems to be coming back, where people are describing things as gay, that's so gay, and things like that. And he wanted to know my opinion about people who use the word gay in that way. And I think most of you all know me by now is that I don't let words get to me. And I also believe that, well, first of all, you have the right to say whatever the fuck you want to say. But also, I believe that it depends on the person who's saying it and the reason they're saying it. I mean, if you're some fucking hater and you say, oh, you're so fucking gay or that's gay or whatever, they're trying to use it as a derogatory term, but that person has no credibility with me. I don't respect that person at all. So anything that person says, it doesn't matter. It's not going to carry any weight with me. But like everything else, there are going to be different opinions about that issue. There's different opinions about every issue. And I can understand if people are offended by someone saying something like, that's so gay. And I've heard it before, and I don't know what's worse. There's this woman I used to work with who was always kind of like almost kind of gothish looking, but she really wasn't goth, who at work, she was very talkative, very opinionated, and she would say stuff like that. She would say, that's so gay, not remembering who she was talking with when I'd be sitting there or whatever, and I didn't really care, but I had the opportunity to hang out with her and her husband once. There was a group of us. We went out to dinner and we went bowling. And I noticed how quiet she became. She hardly said a word. And I got to thinking, is her husband kind of forcing her to do that? Does she choose to behave that way in a different environment? And at work, it's her only outlet to be loud and sometimes obnoxious? It could be. So when I saw her in a different environment, it degraded her opinion and her conversation even more with me. I think we can take any word, any phrase, any description the wrong way at any given time. And we can choose to be offended at any given time. But it's how we allow it to affect us that matters. Now, granted, if there is someone that's in an elected office that's saying stuff like that, yeah, I have an issue with it because that could be a way to change laws to make us more vulnerable. I do think that if someone that's in an elected office says something like that, they just sound stupid and look like a buffoon. But an everyday person, it's like with the protesters that I mentioned at gay pride events. You kind of have to dismiss them and you can insult them a couple of times, but that's what they're there for, is they're dying to get some attention. And one of the things that you can frustrate them the most with is just dismissing them because they really are a joke. The only fear that I would have is that they're carrying weapons and might use them. Fortunately, for every pride event that I've been to where there are protesters, they station police right there near them to make sure they're not just going to whip out a gun and start shooting. They might still do it, but the police would at least get them tackled or shot or whatever before they did too much damage. But that's America for you, isn't it? But I do get it. I do get people being offended. If I were a woman and somebody called me a bitch, I'd probably be offended. But, I mean, I call so many people bitch, you all know that it doesn't have the same connotation. It doesn't have the same effect because I don't mean it in a derogatory way. Now, if I did, you would certainly could tell in my tone that I meant it. I think that there's things that get under our skin for different reasons. You know, everybody has something that they don't like about themselves or are defensive about. When somebody calls me ugly, yeah, it still stings. I've accepted it. I just move on. I'm like, if that's all you have on me is that I'm ugly or fat or something like that, you know, fine. I guess when I get upset or angry is that when someone takes what I said as a joke and tries to be defensive about it, as if I was calling somebody a name to be mean when I wasn't. That sounded more complicated than I wanted it to be, but I think you all get what I mean. Is that sometimes there's people that are looking for a reason to be offended. And there's not much you can do about that. You can just shrug your shoulders and go on. I think if we start really getting down to the nitty gritty, when we're in elementary school in our younger years, being called a sissy, that was just considered a terrible thing. Being called girly or something like that. Doesn't this all kind of stem from male and female stereotypes? Like butch and femme? Well, can I ask a question here? What makes someone butch? What makes someone femme? How did we know what is butch or masculine and what is femme, feminine? I would argue, and this will make some mad, that part of it could be considered learned behavior. We see Hugh Jackman on a movie and think that really is a man. That's how men act. We watch football games and baseball, and we see cowboys, and we think that's what a man should act like. And then on the flip side, we see Marilyn Monroe, Rihanna, Nicole Kidman, and think that is very feminine. That is femme. And is it not arguable? Can we not argue that when we say someone is butch or femme, we're basing it on what society has created for those roles? Honestly, how do you know you're butch? I remember years ago when I had argued that your sexuality is your orientation. It's how you're born. It's what you are. And that masculinity and femininity can be learned behaviors. And I absolutely got shellacked for saying that. And a guy said, well, I was raised by women and I'm still butch. And I was like, well, how do you know? And he argued that it was the way he dressed and the way he talked and the way he carried himself. But then I added on that. I said, well, how do you know those things are butch? And he got aggravated with me and he did not want to talk anymore. But I really meant no harm. I'm asking this sincerely. Could it be that all of this stuff, the use of derogatory terms or taking everyday terms and trying to make them negative, could that not all stem from when we were little kids and you had bullies and people calling each other names and such that kind of targeted your sexuality, your gender? I find it an interesting concept to think about. Yo, psychiatrists and psychologists out there, drop me a line, send me an email, tell me if I'm barking up the wrong tree or not barking up a tree at all with that thinking. But as I was talking to the bestie about this subject, about that's so gay and other terminology, I did go back to the old movies. You go back to the 80s and look at some of the television shows and movies and miniseries and look at some of the words and phrases they used then. And then they were totally acceptable. Now they would not be. I'll give you one example. In the miniseries The Stand, based on the Stephen King novel, the character played by Rob Lowe could not hear and could not speak. And he was described over and over as deaf and dumb. My God, that sounds horrible just saying it. But back then, people who were deaf and could not speak, they weren't called mute. They were called deaf and dumb. And it's terrible looking back on it. But that's just one example where we have progressed and we don't use terminology like that. Handicapped, we say disabled now. And of course, you all know the words that were used to describe gay people. Go back to the show Three's Company, where John Ritter's character, Jack, was pretending to be gay so that he could live in that apartment. And Mr. Roper, the landlord, played by Norman Fell, would make fun of him and do these sissy acts and things around him, mocking him all the time. And the audience would laugh. That could still be done today on a show, but it would be done in a way that that person would be so diminished that they would always be embarrassed for acting so homophobic. So maybe that's where we are now in our society, that a phrase like "that's so gay," it could be used in a negative way, but perhaps gay in that sense of the word isn't about referencing gay people. Maybe it's just a different way of saying something different. Because to me, if someone were to say, "that's so gay," I'm like, "What? Let me see. What is it? Hello?" I'd be all about it, you know? Hello. That is what we talked about when we talk about taking back words. The fact that we use the word queer in the gay community, we did take that away from the haters, even though some of them still use it. It takes that sting away. And because we use it, they don't want to use it. They want to come up with words that they can use that will hurt us. When we use them ourselves, it's kind of hard for them to do that, isn't it? But of course, the main word that led to this discussion was the worst one of all, and that's the N word. I will never use that word. I think it's disgusting. It is a reference used to degrade African Americans, people that are black. It's a reference to slavery, and it is meant to diminish an entire group of people. And it just is disgusting. Do you remember the time? I remember they did screenshots and captured it when Fox News was trying to equate words. And the headline said, "Which word is worse, the N word or cracker?" And they had spelled out the N word like N asterisk, 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 and then spelled out the word cracker. And of course, everybody jumped all over it and said, "Well, if you can't say the word, that one is obviously the worst one." And it's like, duh. Once again, here we have white people, white straight men, trying to play a victim somehow, that somehow they're the only ones who get discriminated against because maybe a gay person, a woman, or a person of color gets 1% of the jobs, and they think that white men should get all of them. I don't know where that came from exactly, but I guess I'm pissed off about that too. It all kind of falls under the same situation when it comes to words. But isn't it true? Men will mock other men by trying to say that they're a woman, like you're a sissy, you're a pussy, you're all these things that are connected to being feminine. Even what I said earlier about Samuel Woodward being in prison, I said he was going to be somebody's bitch. So in my own way, I'm equating that too, aren't I? But then again, for me, I'm not equating that word with a gender. I'm equating it with a different philosophy, a different idea. And once again, if I don't know you, why would my insult have any bearing on your life? It wouldn't, would it? It shouldn't. And trust me, I think most of you can say the same thing, but I've been called every damn name in the book. And you know what? That old saying still rings true. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That sounds like a philosophy to live by. To learn more about the life of Blaze Bernstein, check out the hashtag #BlazeItForward on all social media, or you can check out the website blazebernstein.org. Thank you for listening to this difficult episode of Alan After Dark. I hope you've been challenged and provoked into thought about your life and the world we live in. Remember, take life by the heart and be real. We'll see you soon.